This video is now in session, and if you've been looking at the headlines recently, then you'll know that Biden has been doing badly in the polls, and his approval rating has tanked to a new low. Much of that is driven by the economy. Even Biden voters are not confident in the economy at this moment. If you look at the polls, regardless of what range you go by income, age, race, ethnicity, gender, in most cases, a majority of voters believe that the economy is doing poor or only fair. And so what's driving this? Right now, the economy is improving, right? We see the numbers right now with inflation rate. It's been going down 3.2% in October in last month compared to almost 10% just a couple of months ago. We have one of the lowest unemployment rates in the past decade. And yet, many people disapprove of Biden's handling of the economy. So how has Biden responded to this? Well, he's said that we've done so much, or he's went along these lines as the New Yorker states. We've done so much. If only the voters knew about it, surely we get credit. And this is what many Democrats are pitching, that this is a message game. That if the Democrats push the Inflation Reduction Act as well as the bipartisan infrastructure bill to voters, that perhaps voters will rethink Biden in a different light. But by doing this, Biden is essentially trying to correct Americans to say that, well, the economy is not doing that bad. We've done all of these things to make the economy better, so you should believe us. But the thing is, just like poll numbers don't always tell the story. And obviously, this is just one poll, but if you do take a look at the aggregate polls, then you'll see that Trump has been ahead for an extended period of time, which we haven't seen before this ever in the 2024 election. And there are multiple polls, not just the New York Times, that has this same result or a similar result, that even Biden voters don't think that Biden administration is doing well on this issue. So if you try to correct the American sentiment, you're not going to. In fact, you might get a backlash for doing that. But why is that? Why do many Americans think the economy is poor even though the numbers tell a different story? It's because if you look on the ground, you'll find that many Americans are still dealing with the effects of inflation even after its peak. The thing with inflation is it fluctuates the value of your money, the value of each dollar. And so when you have inflation going up just past the past year, you have milk prices go from $2 to $6, and then now they're starting to decrease to $3 or $4 rather, probably not $3 yet, but regardless, you have this up and down motion, and in many cases, it's a lot more volatile than that because you have different products that are increasing in values in different rates, and then you also have wages that aren't keeping up with inflation. And so you have this conundrum or this cacophony of changes to the value of your money. So how do you react to this? How do you react to $5 being different now compared to what it was just 4 months ago, let alone 4 years ago? When you don't know what the value of your money is anymore, you become very confused at how you should actually value your money, and that leads to distrust towards the cause of your confusion. And at this very moment, people are blaming that on Biden. And so you see this distrust that many voters have on Biden when it comes to the economy, and obviously foreign policy in the past month hasn't been helping that with the social unrest happening in the United States between pro-Palestinians and pro-Israeli pro-Israel demonstrators. And so you have this perception that voters have, which is that Biden is not caring for them, that they don't actually know, that the Washington elites don't really know what's going on the ground. And this is very similar to what we've seen in the past in the 1976 election, for example. Jimmy Carter in the years prior sort of mansplained to Americans, saying that the economy was doing better than they thought, that they were dealing with foreign policy that Americans just didn't really know about it well. The same thing happened in 1992 when George H.W. Bush was seen as tone deaf when it came to the economy, and something similar is happening here with Biden economics, or rather Bidenomics. The New Yorker has said it's a political bust. The New York Times has questioned the purpose of attaching such a label to an economy that many voters feel is poor right now, and many conservatives have lambasted Biden economics or Bidenomics, and it's become a catchphrase with negative connotations. So what can Biden do at this point? Well, luckily, the economy is starting to do better, at least in terms of numbers. We can see here and in the same graph that there's been consistent downward motion since about maybe 9 months ago. And if you look at the stock market's at a new high in 2023. If you look at inflation when comparing it to the rest of the world, the United States is doing a lot better than pretty much most Western countries these days. So what can Biden do? Well, there's not a lot, unfortunately, for him, because the numbers will eventually reflect on voters, but it does take time. We've seen this in the 1992 election and as well as in the 2012 election, when inflation as well as recessions have a lingering effect. And it will still have a lingering effect, especially when it concerns with inflation, because as I've said earlier, when prices fluctuate, people become confused. And so even if inflation rate goes down, even if prices goes down, that actually causes many Americans to be continued to be confused about the value of their money, and that prolongs this distrust that they have towards Biden. And if you look at the past elections, 1992, there was a recession in 1990, 2 years before the election. It ended in around 1991, and yet just before and just after the 1992 election, 81 to 84% of Americans believed that the economy was still in a recession, even though by definition it wasn't. And so you see here that there is a lingering effect that a recession does have on voter sentiment. You can see the same thing here with the 2012 election. Mitt Romney was actually improving in the polls and was very competitive against Barack Obama. Many people thought Barack Obama could have lost because the economy was stagnating in 2010 and in 2011. And even until 2012, many voters were concerned that Barack Obama wasn't doing enough to help them. Obviously, he won mostly because Mitt Romney was a bad candidate, and who knows, maybe the same thing can happen here if Trump becomes again the media darling. Many voters might be reminded of the same sentiments they had in 2020, which might cause them to vote for Biden or at least not vote for Trump. But in the end, the economy is a very sore issue for Biden that he simply cannot be this bad at. So what's the alternative? What can Biden do? As I've said before, not much, but if there is one suggestion, it would be to change the narrative, not necessarily tell Americans that they're wrong, but sort of change what is the perception of Americans about who's at fault to a different enemy. Biden could say that compared to the rest of the world, the United States is actually doing pretty well, and this is not just an American thing. This is a global thing. I know this happened under my administration, but inflation has been rising in every Western country, almost sort of like the pandemic, where it's a global thing, not just an American thing. And so here's what I'm doing. I'm doing XYZ to getting it passed through Congress. And it doesn't even need to be actually effective because the numbers are starting to improve. So what Biden can simply do is say, well, I've had these XYZ bills that specifically target against inflation by cutting spending or by increasing taxes on the wealthy, and this has resulted in a reduced inflation increase rate in 2024 and early 2024. That might be a message that Americans may be willing to accept, It will be a hard one given that inflation did only start to rise under the Biden administration, and it happened after Biden spent over $1 trillion on the economy. But it is certainly better than trying to tell Americans that they are wrong about their perceptions, or that they are wrong about how they feel about the economy on the ground. So that's the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. This video is now adjourned, and I'll see you in the next one.